This story happened to me last summer. I was boating on the Colorado River. Gorgeous place if you've never been. My buddies and I had set out in the morning with a plan to spend a whole day out on the water. It looked like the perfect day for our adventure. The sky was a brilliant blue, stretching as far as the eye could see. To make sure we didn't miss any second of the trip, we set up our GoPros in the boats. Every single minute of the trip would be documented from multiple angles. Little did we know what we were about to witness. I was in the lead, my boat moving smoothly through the water. I was lost in the steady rhythm of my paddling. I lost track of time as we continued down the river. Suddenly, I saw a ruffle in the water ahead, disturbing the otherwise serene surface at that part of the river. I squinted, thinking maybe a fish was doing a little exhibition for me, or maybe a beaver paddling his way home. I'd seen plenty of them in my past adventures, but this disturbance was different. The swirling surface expanded in diameter, and for one heart-stopping moment, something massive broke the surface. My heart started racing, and I couldn't believe my eyes. This was no ordinary fish. The thing barely broke through the surface, but something about its brief encounter with the air sent off alarms in my brain. It was big, too big to be any local resident of the Colorado River. The enormous grayish mass briefly stirred a large part of the surface before it trembled and sunk back into the depths. The water that had been displaced by its sudden appearance forced a wave that rocked my boat. As I started to rock back and forth, I remembered old sea monster tales and felt a surge of fear. I flashed back to childhood stories of mysterious, mythical creatures. The next thing I knew, a huge wave hit me, and I found myself in the water, struggling to right my boat and spluttering against the sudden onslaught. The reality of what just happened struck me hard. Had I just seen an unknown creature? A monster, perhaps? The thought rattled my core, but right then my survival instincts took over. As I struggled to keep my head above the water, something brushed against my leg and I had to fight hard from panicking. Adrenaline pumped through me, intensifying the situation. The water around me roared violently. Something slippery brushed against my legs again, and I made a futile attempt to kick it away. Even in the face of sheer panic, I tried to keep my mind focused, ready to face whatever was lurking beneath the surface. And then the creature emerged. A massive, unsettling image surfaced, leaving me at a loss for words. It was serpent-like, wriggling and curling in the water, its body so long it seemed endless, at least 30 feet, by my quick estimate. Its dark scales caught the sunlight, adding to the surrealness of it all. Just as I forced my shaking hands to raise the camera, with the aim to catch this horrific beauty, a fin or flipper of some sort lashed out of the water, missing me by a mere few inches. Even in my petrified state, I managed to click the record button on my GoPro, hoping desperately that it would capture this experience. The creature's eyes appeared above the surface, humongous and radiating a toxic intensity. They seemed to stare intently, almost glowing. It then reared up, sending more waves that threatened to drown me. It made a deep, echoing sound that resonated through the water. In a rush, I managed to right my boat and paddled quickly toward safety. Behind me, with a final roar, the creature sunk back into the water, its huge serpentine body creating whirlpools in its wake, only to vanish, leaving no trace of the horror I had just experienced. Exhausted and completely drenched, I rejoined my buddies, who had witnessed the whole scene from a safe distance ahead of me, unable to work their way backwards on the river. Disbelief was apparent on their faces. The incident haunted me for weeks, but I also couldn't shake a sense of awe over what I had seen. I've replayed that footage more times than I can count, each time reassuring myself that it's real, each time telling myself it really happened. I've always been drawn to nature, and this time I didn't disappoint me at all with this startling encounter. And now, whenever I see ripples in the water, I can't help but be a bit petrified thinking about what else might be lurking beneath. was in the Catskill Mountains of New York, stuck in a remote cabin during one of the worst storms I've ever witnessed. It was the tail end of February, and this year was colder than usual in New York. I do consider myself an adventurer, but this wasn't the off-grid experience I had in mind. I had expected peaceful solitude, maybe a little snow, and plenty of time to work on my novel. Instead, I got seriously snowed in, feeling trapped and isolated. A howling gale shook the cabin, rattling the windows as snowflakes swirled just beyond the glass. Despite the many books, the dim candlelight and my chattering teeth made reading unenjoyable. I found myself having to be occupied with mundane chores like chopping wood for the fireplace. The silence during the storm was more overwhelming to me than any city noise. I felt insignificant amidst the vast white expanse that was nature at that moment. I had managed to start a fire, scavenged some old canned beans buried deep in the cabin, and I was feeling good about getting through the night. I wrapped myself in as many scratchy woolen blankets as I could find and curled up on the couch. There would be no sleeping for me that night. Just as I was preparing to hunker down for the night, there was a thump against the cabin wall. It jolted me upright. At first, I thought it was a gust of wind, or maybe the trees outside swaying in the storm, but then came another thump, louder and sharper. This was different, more deliberate. I froze, straining to listen over the wind's howl, but the cabin was silent, still in the eye of the storm, I figured. Everything was quiet until I heard it, a deep, reverberating growl echoing through the silence. The sound was unfamiliar and chilling. My heart raced as I held my breath, straining to hear any additional unusual noises. I didn't know what lurked in the Catskills, what was local and what wasn't, what was dangerous and what was a normal sound. I knelt beside the window, peering out into the driving snow. The storm had ramped up, and visibility was limited to only a few feet. My eyes scanned the swirling white landscape, searching for any signs of movement amidst the blizzard. Alone in a blizzard, in a remote Catskill Mountains cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was going to happen. The realization was like a bucket of ice water over my head. As these thoughts swirled, something slammed into the front door. Right away, I knew it wasn't just the storm. No gust of wind had that kind of force. Panic surged through me, and I shrank away from the door. It was then, above the storm, I heard it. A deep rumble and the sliding, grating noise of something heavy being dragged near the wooden shed near the cabin. Gathering my courage, I quietly approached the window and took a quick look outside. Somehow, through the intense snowfall, I could see something unforgettable, something out of place. Just at the edge of the tiny clearing, something was hunched over, humanoid in form but grotesquely massive. It was tall, at least 8 or 9 feet, with a bulky, robust figure covered in thick, coarse hair that ranged in shades from brown to a lighter reddish hue. It was hunched over, grappling with the rusty handle of the shed door. With each tug, its muscles showed its strength. I could see its broad cheekbones, prominent forehead, and jutting jaw. Then it turned, and I could see its eyes, deep set under thick brown eyebrows. They glinted ominously, reflecting the little light offered by the struggling fire inside the cabin. An acrid, putrid smell tainted the biting cold air, sinking into the cabin and causing me to choke. Suddenly, it howled, breaking the sound of the storm with a long-lasting echo. The sound resonated deeply, heightening my terror. Instinctively, I turned off the light, hoping to become less noticeable. It felt like forever before the noise stopped, leaving only the storm and the crackling fire. As I secretly peeked out again, the encroaching darkness met me with an empty sight. The colossal figure was gone, leaving only the disturbed snow. In the following silence, I felt a strange relief. Not because the creature was gone, but because it had been real. I hadn't just imagined this, hadn't dreamed up some hulking beast from being stuck in the cabin. I wasn't crazy. There was a strange peace in knowing it actually existed. Amazingly, I finally got some sleep that night, although with one eye open the entire time. The creature's reality raced back into my mind with each animal I encountered in the days that followed. I began to wonder if those tales that I'd heard over the years of creatures in the forest, the ones that I'd thought were just legends, were based on reality. I realized that I might have just underestimated the wilderness and its secrets. The encounter took place a few years ago, during winter in a national forest in Alaska. My buddy, Mike, and I are passionate about snowmobiling, always looking for untouched powder to carve through with our machines. This place was our favorite, a vast forest with miles of untouched snow. That particular morning started just right. Cold, crisp air, perfect blue skies, and freshly fallen snow that came up to our knees. We were geared up, machines humming, and we were eager for the adventure ahead. We set off, speeding across the flats, kicking up snow behind us. Everything around us was draped in white. The adrenaline rush, the roar of our snowmobiles, and the biting cold air was something I craved. We pushed our machines, gliding across frozen ponds, jumping off hills, and dashing around the thick columns of spruce and pine. As the sun set, it cast long shadows over the forest. The trees grew denser as we moved deeper into the forest. It felt a bit ominous. Mike, the daredevil, was always trying to one-up me. He hit the throttle, shouting something like, "Race you to Crystal Lake," over the roar of his engine. A snowmobile race as the sun was setting? It was a tempting proposition, one I wasn't about to decline. As we were gaining speed, something strange happened. The atmosphere suddenly felt different, like the barometric pressure changed or something. You know how you can sometimes sense a snowstorm hours before it hits? It felt like that, just more intense. I felt we weren't alone. Suddenly, Mike's sled veered off, making him lose his balance. I raced up, just in time to see his machine disappearing into a snowy ditch. My buddy was flat on his back, dazed, but thankfully unhurt. As we were dusting off, laughing it off, that's when it hit us. The overpowering smell was like that of a rotting animal, but intensified. The putrid stench of decay bore into our nostrils in waves, turning our stomach. While we were wrestling with the stink, something nearby rustled the undergrowth. Sure, it could have been any animal, moose, deer, bear, but deep down we knew it wasn't normal. With the adrenaline rush and that unsettling smell, we were definitely spooked. We shined our lights around, and that's when we caught a glimpse of something. It was this looming shadow, like a figure briefly caught in our beams, tangled amongst the pines. Its towering height and lean frame were unnerving. Its eyes, don't even get me started on its eyes. They glowed like embers on its face. But that's not all. We heard this terrible growling, not like a bear or a wolf. It was a horrifying, ungodly sound. The sound rattled us to our cores. The scream was abruptly silenced by a thud. I snapped out of my shock, grabbing my emergency flare. The shadows were deepening now too, and I knew we had to leave or risk not being able to get back. Suddenly, the thing vanished into the dark. Its screams echoed through the silent forest before suddenly stopping. I spun around, lighting a flare I had in my snowmobile's emergency kit. The flare pierced the darkness, illuminating the forest. That's when I saw it clearly. The Wendigo. It was massive. It towered over me, standing at least 8 feet tall with these big antlers on top of its deer skull-like head. But I couldn't stop looking at its eyes, 2 glowing yellow lights peering out from deep holes in the skull. It was standing near Mike, who was sprawled out on the ground. The creature's body was gaunt, as if skin had been stretched over bones, with tatters of decaying flesh. Its legs were unnaturally long, resembling those of an elk. And that smell, it was even stronger, unbearable, and making me choke in the cold, crisp air. Panicking, I shouted, threw rocks, and did everything I could to distract it. And for a second, it worked. Those piercing yellow eyes focused on me, but the distraction was enough to divert its attention from Mike. I rushed to him, practically dragging my friend, trying to help him onto his feet. Simultaneously, I grabbed for the snowmobile's ignition, revving the machine to life. We had left the second snowmobile behind, but considering the circumstances, losing it wasn't on our list of concerns right now. We raced away, hoping the creature wouldn't pursue. We barely made it to the service road and stumbled upon a forest ranger's post. Looking wildly around, we finally felt safe and collapsed from exhaustion and terror. We never dared to return for our sled. It took time for Mike and me to come to terms with our encounter, realizing we'd faced a creature of folklore, the Wendigo. We've mostly kept the tale to ourselves, wary of disbelief and ridicule. We sometimes joke about it to make it less horrifying. But when the night comes, and it's just the two of us reminiscing over a couple of beers, we drop the facade. No matter how we tell the tale, we can't forget our chilling encounter. This one night at Caddo Lake in Texas is the most confusing night I've ever had in my life. It's a story that still leaves me puzzled. It started as a quiet night, just me, the water, my fishing gear, and a cooler full of icy beer. This happened under a dark Texan sky, where the stars were brighter than anywhere else I had ever experienced. To be honest, it felt almost spiritual, the solitude and quiet, with the lake's surface reflecting the sky. It was deep into the summer and too muggy for a normal day of fishing. But under the cool night sky, it was perfect. Night fishing is different. You rely more on your senses than sight. Every little nibble on the line, every whisper of the wind could be a catch. I remember sitting there on my old boat, idling in the calm water. I watched my float bob gently along with the current, beer chilling in one hand while my other hand was ever ready on my fishing rod. Nocturnal creatures buzzed softly in the background. The lake, usually busy with activity during the day, was now eerily silent, as if in a deep, unending slumber. It was peaceful, a much-needed escape from the daily grind. That's when things took a strange turn. It was around midnight, and I had already reeled in a few good catches. Just as I cast my line again, something caught my eye from the corner of my vision, an odd, faint, metallic glint from the water. The moon, though hidden behind clouds, was casting just enough light for the strange shimmer to be noticeable. I squinted my eyes, trying to figure out what was causing that. Tales that I had heard of Caddo Lake crossed my mind. Although I'm not superstitious, something felt off, and my gut was telling me that something wasn't right. Chasing the thought away, I turned my attention back to my line, gripping my fishing rod a bit tighter, and that's when it happened. I would have blamed the beer, but I was completely sober. A splash, louder than any fish or beaver scuttling through the water, echoed across the lake, and suddenly the stillness of the night wasn't so comforting anymore. From the corner of my eye, I noticed this dark silhouette against the night sky on the gnarled limb of a nearby tree. I turned my head just a touch, not wanting to spook whatever it was, hoping it was just a great horned owl or something. But what stared back at me, reflected in the waters of the lake, were two large, radiant red eyes. It was like staring at bright stoplights in the dark water. They glowed like embers, larger than any eyes I'd seen in the woods. A chill ran down my spine as I tried to make sense of the sight. A large, winged figure, about 5 feet tall, perched on the branch, its body almost human-like, but its giant leathery wings similar to that of a bat. Its presence made the peaceful surroundings feel unsettling. The once quiet hum of the night now felt eerie. I'd heard of the Caddo Lake booger, but this wasn't it. This winged creature reminded me of the urban legends, like the Mothman that frightened many. I began to understand the fear in those whispered legends. I gasped as it suddenly stretched its wings to their full length. It felt like time had slowed down as I watched the creature take flight, those fiery red eyes holding my gaze for a second longer before it shot up into the sky. Suddenly, I was alone again. The creature was gone, but its blazing eyes were imprinted on my eyelids. The night felt heavier and more silent than before. I sat there, gripping my fishing rod, unease replacing the earlier calm. Finally, I snapped to and packed up my gear. With one last look at the deserted tree branch against the inky night sky, I left the lake. I left behind the once peaceful solitude, now tainted by that unsettling encounter. I know it's hard to believe, but I swear on my life, this happened. Every time I see those glimmering stars against the night sky or catch a slight glint on a reflecting water surface, I'm back at that lake, the fiery red eyes of the Mothman piercing through my mind and soul. I'm a city guy, used to the concrete and noise of downtown Chicago, but now and then, the rush of it gets to be too much. I mean, I live smack dab in the middle of the loop, and sometimes the unending noise and humdrum of people gets to be too much. So, it was in the fall, about 3 years back, and I decided to take a trip into the country. I felt the need for a change, and so I chose the Ozarks. The mountains were a refreshing change from city skylines. I was looking for some peace, a break from the city's hustle. Plus, word had it that the Ozarks were heaven for fly fishing. I'm no expert fisherman, but the idea felt right. My first few days went by well. I pitched a nice little tent near the river. I'd untie my rod, test the line, and sit by the river's edge, casting out my flies. Fly fishing felt therapeutic. One day, I decided to push a bit further into the woods. I noticed a winding trail, probably a deer path, disappearing into the timberland. I followed it for some fun and to change up my day. I'd put away my rod and slung my backpack across one shoulder, trekking deeper into the forest, sticks breaking under my boots. That's how I found it, a natural cave tucked away and secluded. I hadn't come across many caves in my life, and so curiosity pulled me in. I took out my flashlight, illuminating the cave walls, and that's when I noticed something strange. On the cave wall, hidden amidst claustrophobic overgrowths of moss and other prehistoric-looking fungi, were drawings. To me, they looked similar to those indigenous tribes might have created. Most notably and crudely carved out but visible was an incredible image of a beast, a large thing easily towering over 7 feet, standing on what looked like legs of a dog and an elongated face. The depiction had a hunch to its back, broad canine-like shoulders, and a massive chest. It was a crude, archaic drawing, but the long snout, the legs, the beastly stature, it was all unmistakable. That ancient drawing in the dim cave gave me chills. The cave drawing felt eerily real, and it deeply unsettled me. That day felt horrible, longer than usual right at that moment. As night approached, I settled back to camp, but a palpable tension was in the air, intensified by the encroaching darkness. That's when I first heard it, a sound from far, far off in the distance. It was a howl, a deep, guttural howl echoed through the wilderness, unsettling me. This wasn't a wolf. This howl carried a menacing echo, awakening age-old fears deep within me. I sat near the fire, unable to shake off the unease from the howls echoing in the night. It was then I noticed, over in the trees, in the dense darkness beyond my camp circle, a pair of pulsing yellow orbs, eyes glowing yellow. That's when my heart sank. Could it be? Were the drawings I'd seen more than folklore? My skin prickled, and a fear I'd never felt before gripped me. For every troublesome minute that ticked by, the eyes drew closer and the growls grew louder, echoing within me with a visceral fear. My fire dimmed to a mere glimmer, and the glowing eyes seemed to loom, getting closer, and then I saw it. Out from the veil of darkness stepped a creature that dwarfed my nearly 6-foot frame, thick, unkempt fur blanketing its hunched back, broad shoulders that powered into muscular arms ending with clawed extremities. It stood on its hind legs, a humanoid form that held a deep sense of wrongness, like watching a wolf rise to walk on hind legs. On its face, a feature that would haunt me forever, a long snout, flared nostrils that visibly quivered, taking in the air. Those eyes, still glowing yellow, glared down at me from under a pronounced brow ridge, its snarled, saliva-dotted fangs reflecting off the fire, hitting me with a wave of an acrid, putrid smell that was almost as terrifying as the sight of the creature. It was like something out of a nightmare. I wasted no further time. Frantically, I dug for the car keys. Feet flew over hobbled ground, and before I knew it, I was tearing down the road with glancing eyes on the rear view. I didn't stop until I was far away. That encounter changed me. To this day, I'm not sure if what I saw was really a mythic creature or something more explainable, but whatever it was, it left a deep impression within me, a sense that while we learn to navigate life, there are things out there, in the wildest and untouched corners of the world, that remain beyond our comprehension, proof of the mysteries nature still hides. We think we've tamed the wild, but some creatures refuse to be caged.